The firewood tumbled from her arms for the third time that morning, and Sarah Hartford felt something crack in her lower back that made her cry out into the frozen Montana air. It was November 1883, and the wind coming down from the mountains carried the promise of a brutal winter. Sarah was 22 years old, a widow of 8 months, and the stack of wood she needed to chop and carry before the first real snow would break her long before she finished it. Her husband Thomas had died in a mining accident the previous March, leaving her with a small cabin, 40 acres of stubborn land, and debts she was still trying to understand. The banker in town, Mr. Hutchins, had explained it to her twice, but the numbers swam in her head like minnows in a creek. All she knew for certain was that she owed money she did not have, and if she could not make it through the winter, she would lose everything Thomas had worked for. She bent to gather the scattered logs, and her back screamed in protest. Tears froze on her cheeks before they could fall. The woodpile behind the cabin mocked her with its enormity. Pine and lodgepole, 6 cords at least, all needing to be split and stacked before the heavy snows came. Thomas had always handled this work, his strong arms swinging the axe in steady rhythm while she prepared their meals and tended the small garden. Now both tasks fell to her, and she was failing at the one that mattered most. A woman could survive on thin soup and hard bread, but she could not survive a Montana winter without heat. Sarah forced herself upright, clutching the wood to her chest, and staggered toward the cabin. Each step sent lightning up her spine. She had made it perhaps 20 feet when she heard the sound of a horse approaching. Her first instinct was fear. A woman alone was vulnerable in ways that made her careful about strangers. But when she turned, shading her eyes against the low sun, she saw a rider leading a pack mule, moving slowly up the trail that passed near her property. He was tall in the saddle, dressed in worn leather and denim, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the wind. As he drew closer, she could see he was young, perhaps 26 or 27, with several days of dark stubble on his jaw and eyes the color of a summer sky. Those eyes took in her struggle with an intensity that made her self-conscious. She must look half mad, she thought, standing here with wood clutched to her chest like a child holding a doll. The cowboy reined in his horse, a handsome bay gelding with kind eyes. He touched the brim of his hat in greeting. "Morning, ma'am. Looks like you could use a hand." Sarah's pride flared hot in her chest. "I am managing fine, thank you." He glanced at the massive woodpile, then at her trembling arms, then at the cabin with its barely smoking chimney. When his eyes returned to her face, they were gentle, but knowing. "Yes, ma'am, I can see that. But I have been riding since dawn, and my horse could use some water and rest. If you would not mind, I could split some of that wood while I am stopped. Fair trade for the hospitality." She should send him away. That would be the proper thing, the safe thing. But her back was on fire, and the wood would not split itself, and something in his face told her he meant no harm. There was a steadiness to him, a quiet competence that reminded her painfully of Thomas. "There is a trough by the barn," she said finally. "The water is fresh. I drew it this morning." He dismounted in one fluid motion, moving like someone who had spent more of his life on horseback than on foot. Up close, she could see the details of him. The small scar above his left eyebrow, the laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled easily, though he was not smiling now. The way his hands, large and calloused, handled the reins with unconscious grace. He led his horse and mule toward the trough, and Sarah made her way into the cabin, depositing her armload of wood beside the stove with relief. Through the window, she watched him tend to his animals with the same quiet competence she had sensed. He removed their saddles and packs, checked their hooves, spoke to them in a low voice she could not quite hear. Then he shrugged out of his coat, hung it on the fence post, and rolled up his sleeves despite the cold. When he picked up Thomas's axe from where she had left it embedded in the chopping block, he tested its weight and balance like a man greeting an old friend. The first swing split a log clean down the middle, with a crack that echoed across the frozen ground. The second swing followed so quickly it seemed part of the same motion. Sarah found herself unable to look away. He worked with a rhythm that was almost hypnotic, each movement efficient and sure. The pile of split wood began to grow beside him while the unsplit pile diminished. He did not slow or falter, just maintained that steady, relentless pace. An hour passed. Sarah busied herself inside the cabin, trying not to watch him, failing. She put a pot of coffee on the stove and sliced some of the bread she had baked 2 days ago. It was the least she could do. When she stepped outside with the offerings, he had removed his shirt despite the November chill, and she could see the muscles moving beneath his skin as he worked. Sweat gleamed on his shoulders. He had made a significant dent in the woodpile. "You should rest," she called. "Want to have some coffee?" He sank the axe into the block and straightened, wiping his face with his discarded shirt. When he walked over, she handed him the tin cup, and their fingers brushed briefly. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her, and she pulled back quickly, confused by her own reaction. "Thank you, ma'am." He drank deeply, and she watched his throat work. "That hits the spot." "Sarah," she said, "my name is Sarah Hartford." "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Hartford. I am James Dalton." He took a bite of bread and nodded appreciatively. "This is fine bread." "It is nothing special." She wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. "You have done more than enough, Mr. Dalton. I cannot ask you to do more." "You did not ask. I offered." His blue eyes met hers steadily. "And I am not finished. You have a winter's worth of wood there, and from the look of things, you are in no shape to handle it alone." Heat flooded her cheeks. "I appreciate your help, but I cannot pay you. I have nothing to offer." "Did I ask for payment?" His tone was mild, but there was something underneath it, something that might have been anger at the world that would leave a woman in such circumstances. Sometimes people help because it needs doing. No other reason required. Before she could respond, he had returned to the woodpile and resumed his work. Sarah stood there, coffee cooling in the pot she still held, watching him attack the logs with renewed determination. Something tight and frightened in her chest began to loosen slightly. When was the last time someone had helped her without wanting something in return? When was the last time someone had seen her struggling and simply stepped in? She went back inside and began preparing a proper meal. It was past noon, and he had been working for hours. The least she could do was feed him. She had precious little in the larder, but she could make a decent stew from the salted venison, potatoes, and carrots. As she worked, she found herself thinking about James Dalton. There was something about him, something beyond his obvious physical capability, a gentleness in how he spoke, a respect in how he looked at her. He had not leered or made inappropriate comments. He had simply seen someone in need and acted. By the time the stew was ready, he had made remarkable progress. The woodpile was half its original size, and the stacked split wood reached nearly to her shoulder. She stepped out onto the porch and called to him, "Mr. Dalton, please come eat. You have earned it." He set down the axe and walked over, pulling his shirt back on. She led him inside, suddenly self-conscious about the state of her cabin. It was clean but sparse, with little decoration and less comfort. The furniture was rough-hewn, made by Thomas in their first year of marriage. The single room served as kitchen, dining area, and living space, with a curtained alcove where her narrow bed stood. James removed his hat and took the seat she offered at the small table. When she ladled stew into a bowl and set it before him, he bowed his head briefly before eating. Another good sign. She served herself a smaller portion and sat across from him. "This is excellent," he said after the first few bites. "You are a fine cook, Mrs. Hartford." "Sarah, please, and thank you." She studied him over the rim of her own bowl. "Where are you headed, Mr. Dalton?" "James?" he countered with a slight smile. "I was working on a ranch down near Helena, but the owner sold out to a big cattle company. They brought in their own men, so I was let go. I am heading up to Fort Benton to see about winter work, maybe on one of the ranches along the Missouri." "That is a long ride from here." "A few days, yes, but I am in no particular hurry." He met her eyes. "The work will wait, or it will not. Either way, there will be something. They ate in companionable silence for a while. Sarah found herself relaxing in his presence, the initial wariness fading. There was something peaceful about James Dalton, despite his obvious strength. He did not fill the silence with empty chatter or boasts about his own importance. He simply was, solid and present in a way that made her feel less alone. "Your husband?" he asked finally, gently. "If you do not mind my asking." "Mining accident last March." The words came easier now, 8 months later, though the grief still sat heavy in her chest. "Cave in at the Silver Bell. He was killed instantly," they said. "At least he did not suffer." "I am sorry for your loss." The sincerity in his voice made her throat tighten. "Thank you. We had 3 years together, good years mostly. He was a good man." "I do not doubt it." James gestured around the cabin. "He built this?" "Yes. Every plank and nail. He had plans for more. A bigger house, a proper barn, livestock beyond the few chickens I keep." She smiled sadly. Thomas was always planning for the future. "And now you are trying to keep it going alone." It was not a question, but she answered anyway. "I am trying, but it is harder than I expected. There are debts I did not know about. The bank may take the land if I cannot pay. And then there is the simple matter of surviving." She gestured toward the window, where the woodpile was visible. "I've been working on that wood for 2 weeks. My back gave out this morning. I thought I would freeze before I finished." James set down his spoon and looked at her with those steady blue eyes. "How much wood do you need to make it through winter?" "All of it, maybe more. Last year we burned through 6 cords, and Thomas said it was a mild winter." He nodded slowly, as if making a decision. "I will finish it for you." "What?" "No, you have already done so much." "I will finish it," he repeated more firmly. "All of it. Split and stacked properly so it will dry and burn clean. It will take me a few days, but I have the time." "James, I cannot ask that of you. You said you needed to get to Fort Benton." "You are not asking, I am offering. And Fort Benton will still be there in a week." He leaned forward, his expression intense. "Sarah, no one should have to face what you are facing alone. I have the strength and the skill to help, and it costs me nothing but time. Let me do this." She wanted to refuse. Pride demanded it, but survival was more important than pride. And the truth was, she needed help desperately. If she injured her back further, she might not recover in time to see spring. And then what would become of her? "I can feed you," she said finally. "And there is a lean-to behind the barn where you can sleep if the weather stays clear. It is not much, but it is shelter." "That is more than enough." He stood and carried his empty bowl to the wash basin. "I should get back to it. Daylight is short this time of year." She watched him return to his work through the window as she cleaned up from the meal. The temperature was dropping as the sun moved lower in the sky, but James did not slow. The rhythmic crack of splitting wood became a sort of music, filling the empty spaces of her day. For the first time in months, Sarah felt something other than despair. Not hope exactly, not yet, but perhaps the possibility of hope. As evening approached, she went out to the lean-to and cleared it out as best she could. It was weather-tight but cold, so she brought several blankets and a lantern. When James finally stopped working as full darkness fell, she showed him the space. "It is not much," she apologized. "It is dry and out of the wind. I have slept in worse places." He smiled at her, and the expression transformed his face, making him seem younger and somehow more open. "Thank you, Sarah." "Thank you, James, for everything." They stood there in the lamplight, the November cold pressing close around them, and something passed between them that Sarah could not quite name. It felt like recognition, as if some part of her soul had been waiting for some part of his. The feeling frightened her with its intensity, and she stepped back quickly. "Good night, then," she said. "Good night." She hurried back to the cabin, her heart beating faster than the cold walk warranted. Inside, she barred the door more out of habit than any real fear of James, and sat on the edge of her bed trying to understand what had just happened. She was a widow, still in mourning. She had no business feeling anything for any man, let alone a drifting cowboy she had met just hours ago. It was inappropriate and disrespectful to Thomas's memory. But as she lay in bed that night, listening to the wind howl around the cabin, she could not stop thinking about James Dalton, the way he moved, the steadiness of his presence, the kindness in his eyes. She told herself it was gratitude, nothing more. He was helping her survive, and she was grateful. That was all. Sleep came slowly, and when it did, she dreamed of the sound of splitting wood and steady blue eyes. The next morning dawned clear and bitterly cold. Sarah rose before sunrise, as was her habit, and stoked the fire in the stove. She mixed biscuit dough and put coffee on to boil, then stepped outside to check on the chickens. James was already awake, she saw. His horse and mule were fed and watered, and he was doing some sort of stretching exercises near the lean-to. When he saw her, he raised a hand in greeting. "Morning," he called. "Good morning. Come inside and warm up. Breakfast will be ready soon." He joined her in the cabin a few minutes later, bringing with him the smell of cold air and horses. Over biscuits and coffee, they talked about small things: the weather, the likelihood of snow, the best routes to Fort Benton. Sarah found herself enjoying the conversation more than she had expected. James was well-spoken and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh. "I have not laughed like that in a long time," she admitted, surprised by her own admission. "Laughter is good medicine," James said. "My mother used to say that. She claimed you could cure most ailments with laughter, sunshine, and hard work." "Your mother sounds wise. Is she still living?" His expression clouded. "No. She passed when I was 17. Fever took her and my youngest sister. My father followed 6 months later. Broken heart, I think, though the doctor called it pneumonia." "I am sorry. Do you have other family?" "A brother somewhere. We lost touch after my father died. He went east. I went west. That was nearly 10 years ago." James shrugged, but she could see the old pain in his eyes. "I have been on my own since then, working ranches, riding fence, breaking horses, whatever needs doing." "That sounds like a lonely life." "It can be," he admitted, "but it has its freedoms too. No one to answer to but yourself. No one to disappoint." "I cannot imagine you disappointing anyone." The words were out before she could stop them, and heat rushed to her face. James looked at her with an expression she could not quite read, something between surprise and pleasure. "You barely know me, Sarah. I know you spent yesterday splitting wood for a stranger. I know you are spending today doing the same. That tells me what I need to know about your character." He held her gaze for a long moment, then looked down at his coffee. "You give me too much credit. I am just a man doing what should be done." "That is more than most men would do." Before he could respond, a sound outside made them both turn. Hoofbeats, several horses moving fast. Sarah's stomach clenched with anxiety. She was not expecting visitors, and unexpected visitors were rarely good news. James rose smoothly and moved to the window, his body positioned between her and the door in a way that was protective without being obvious. "You expecting someone?" "No." 3 men rode into her yard and dismounted. Sarah recognized them with a sinking feeling. Vic Holloway and 2 of his ranch hands from the Triple H spread that bordered her property to the south. Holloway was a big man, thick through the middle, with a florid face and mean eyes. He had been sniffing around her land since Thomas died, making offers that were insultingly low and comments that were even worse. "Stay inside," James said quietly. "Let me handle this. This is my property, my problem. Then we will handle it together." He opened the door and stepped out onto the porch, Sarah close behind him. Holloway's eyes narrowed when he saw James. "Who is this, Mrs. Hartford? You take up with drifters now?" "Mr. Holloway?" Sarah kept her voice level, though anger burned in her chest. This is my property. You have no business here unless invited. Now that is not very neighborly. Holloway mounted the porch steps, his men flanking him. He was trying to intimidate her with his size and numbers, a tactic he had used before. I came by to make you another offer on this land, a generous offer. I have told you before, Mr. Holloway, this land is not for sale. That is foolish talk, and you know it. A woman alone cannot work this place, cannot even keep herself in Firewood from what I hear. His eyes slid over James dismissively. You need protection out here. My protection. Sell me the land and I will see you set up nice in town, clean work, respectable lodgings. The implication in his tone made Sarah's skin crawl. Before she could respond, James spoke up. The lady has given you her answer, Mr. Holloway. I suggest you respect it. Holloway's face darkened. I was not talking to you, Drifter. This is business between me and Mrs. Hartford. Any business you have with Mrs. Hartford is finished? James's voice was calm but hard. You should leave now. One of Holloway's men, a skinny fellow with a cruel mouth, laughed. You gonna make us, Cowboy? Sarah saw the tension in James's shoulders, the way his hands hung loose at his sides. She had seen men square off like this before, knew how quickly it could turn violent. Please, she said quickly, there is no need for trouble. Mr. Holloway, I appreciate your offer, but my answer has not changed. Now please leave. Holloway looked between her and James, calculation in his piggy eyes. He was weighing his options, trying to decide if pushing further was worth the risk. Finally, he stepped back and spat tobacco juice onto her porch. You are making a mistake, Mrs. Hartford. Winter is coming, and a woman alone faces all sorts of dangers. Accidents happen. Fires start. People freeze to death. He smiled, showing yellow teeth. You think about that when you're huddling in your cabin come January. That sounds like a threat, Mr. Holloway, James said softly. Just stating facts, Cowboy. Just stating facts. Holloway descended the steps and mounted his horse. His men followed suit. You have until spring to reconsider, Mrs. Hartford. After that, the bank will sell me this land anyway, and you will get nothing. Think on that. They rode out in a cloud of dust. Sarah realized she was shaking. Whether from fear or anger, she could not say. James turned to her, concern in his eyes. Are you all right? Yes. No, I do not know. She wrapped her arms around herself. He has been coming around since Thomas died. Each time, his offers get lower and his threats get less subtle. He has threatened you before? Not directly, but he makes sure I understand what could happen if I do not cooperate. And he is right about one thing. The bank will likely foreclose come spring. Then he will buy the land for a fraction of its worth, and there is nothing I can do about it. James's jaw tightened. How much do you owe the bank? $400. It might as well be $4,000. I have no way to earn that kind of money before spring. What about selling cattle? Timber? We had 3 cows. I sold them in summer to pay other debts. The timber rights were already sold to pay for Thomas's burial and headstone. She laughed bitterly. I am rich in land and poor in everything else. James was quiet for a moment, thinking. There are ways to earn money over winter. I could hire out for work, send you what I make. No. The word came out more forcefully than she intended. You have already done too much. I will not take your wages. Besides, you could not earn $400 in a few months of ranch work. Probably not, he admitted, but it would be something. I appreciate the thought, but it is my problem to solve. She straightened her shoulders, trying to project a confidence she did not feel. Now you should get back to the wood. We are wasting daylight. He looked like he wanted to argue, but instead he nodded and returned to the chopping block. Sarah went inside and leaned against the closed door, her heart still racing from the confrontation. Holloway frightened her, not just because of his threats, but because he had the power to follow through on them. If he decided to burn her out or worse, who would stop him? The nearest law was in town, 15 miles away, and Sheriff Blake was in Holloway's pocket. For the rest of the day, she tried to keep busy with household tasks, but her mind kept circling back to her problems. The debt, the bank, Holloway's threats. The impossibility of her situation pressed down on her like a physical weight. Through the window, she watched James work steadily, hour after hour. The pile of split wood grew higher. By evening, he had finished nearly half of what remained. When darkness forced him to stop, she called him in for supper. She had made bean soup and cornbread, simple food but filling. They ate quietly at first, the events of the morning hanging between them. "I have been thinking," James said finally, "about your situation." "There is nothing to think about. It is what it is." "Maybe, but there might be options you have not considered." He set down his spoon. "What if you did not face winter alone?" She looked at him, not understanding. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if I stayed? Not just for a few days, but through the winter. I could help you work the land, keep the place running. Maybe we could find a way to earn that $400 together." Sarah's heart began to pound. "James, I cannot ask that of you." "You are not asking. I am offering." "But why? You do not know me. This is not your problem." He met her eyes steadily. "Because it is the right thing to do. Because no one should have to face what you are facing alone. And because—" He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "Because I want to help you, Sarah. You in this place. I cannot explain it better than that." She wanted to say yes. The thought of facing winter with someone beside her, someone strong and capable and kind, was almost overwhelming in its appeal. But it was not proper. A man and woman living together without marriage would scandalize the community, would destroy what little reputation she had left. "People would talk," she said quietly. "They would assume things." "Let them talk." "You would know the truth." "I would know the truth. That should be enough." "It is not that simple. If people think I am living in sin, they will not do business with me. The ladies in town already barely acknowledge me. This would give them the excuse they need to cut me off completely." James frowned, clearly not having considered this angle. "Then I will sleep in town, ride out each day to work. That would be proper enough, would it not? That is 15 miles each way. You would spend half your day riding. I have ridden farther for less reason." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. His determination to help her, his willingness to inconvenience himself so thoroughly, touched something deep inside her. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. He reached across the table and took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid. "Because from the moment I saw you struggling with that firewood, something in me knew I was meant to help you. I cannot explain it better than that. It is just what I know to be true." She looked down at their joined hands, feeling the connection between them like a living thing. This was dangerous. She knew it was dangerous. She was vulnerable, grieving, desperate. He was handsome and kind and saying all the right things. It would be so easy to let herself fall, to mistake gratitude for something deeper. But when she looked up into his eyes, she saw something that took her breath away. Not pity, not lust, but a genuine caring, a tenderness that made her chest ache. "All right," she said softly. "Stay, help me. But you must let me pay you somehow. Room and board at least." "Room and board is payment enough." "It is not. You could be earning wages elsewhere." "I would rather be here." The simple statement hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Sarah gently pulled her hand back, suddenly aware of how much she wanted to keep holding on. This was happening too fast. She needed to be careful, to guard her heart. But as she looked at James Dalton across her small table, she felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt safe. Over the next 3 days, James finished splitting and stacking all the firewood. The neat stacks stood against the cabin and barn, enough to see her through even a harsh winter, but he did not stop there. He repaired the barn roof where it was starting to leak, replaced broken fence posts, cleaned the trough and well, and did 100 other small tasks that Sarah had been putting off or could not manage alone. He worked from first light until dark, pausing only for the meals she prepared. They fell into a routine that felt oddly domestic. She would wake before dawn and start coffee, and he would come in from the lean-to to warm up and eat breakfast. They would talk about the day's tasks, and then he would head out to work while she handled the indoor chores and tended the chickens. At midday, she would bring him lunch wherever he was working. In the evening, they would eat supper together and talk, really talk, about everything and nothing. Sarah learned that James had been born in Missouri, the son of a school teacher and a farmer. He had learned to read young and loved books, though he rarely had access to them anymore. He was good with animals, particularly horses, and had a gentle touch that earned their trust. He did not drink to excess, did not gamble, attended church when he could, though he harbored doubts about some of the theology. He believed in hard work, fair dealing, and treating people with respect regardless of their station. James learned that Sarah had been born in Ohio, the daughter of a shopkeeper who died when she was 12. Her mother had remarried a man who drank, and Sarah had left home at 17 to work as a seamstress in Cincinnati. She had met Thomas Hartford at a church social. He had been planning to head west to seek his fortune, and she had been looking for a way out of her situation. They married within 3 months and headed to Montana Territory together. The marriage had been one of convenience at first, but they had grown to care for each other deeply. She regretted that they had never had children, but Thomas's long hours in the mine and her own exhaustion had left little energy for anything beyond survival. As they shared their histories, Sarah felt herself growing closer to James in ways that both thrilled and frightened her. She found herself thinking about him constantly, noticing small things, the way he smiled when he was pleased about something, the gentleness of his hands when he worked with the animals, the sound of his laughter, rare but genuine. She began to take more care with her appearance, pinning her hair more carefully, wearing her better dress even for everyday tasks. And she noticed the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not paying attention. There was warmth in his gaze, an appreciation that went beyond the physical. He looked at her like she mattered, like she was worth something beyond the work she could do or the convenience she could provide. On the fourth evening, as they sat by the fire after supper, James said, "I should head into town tomorrow. See if I can find some work for the winter. The wood is done, and the repairs are mostly finished. I cannot keep taking your charity without contributing." Sarah felt her stomach drop. She had known this was coming, but she was not ready for it. "You have contributed plenty, more than I could ever repay. You know what I mean, real work, wages, something to help with that debt. What kind of work is there in November? Most ranchers have laid off their extra hands for winter. Maybe, but there is always work for someone willing to do anything. Mucking stables, hauling freight, cutting ice when the river freezes. I will find something." She knew he was right, but the thought of him leaving each day, of spending long hours alone again, filled her with a melancholy she could not quite hide. James must have seen something in her face because he leaned forward, his expression concerned. "Sarah, what is wrong?" "Nothing. I am just being foolish." "Tell me." She looked into the fire, unable to meet his eyes. "I have gotten used to having you here, used to the company. I know that is selfish of me, but it is the truth." "That is not selfish. I have gotten used to being here. Used to—" He paused, and when she looked up, his eyes were intense. "Used to you." The air between them seemed to thicken. Sarah felt her pulse quicken. This was the moment, she realized. The moment when they either acknowledged what was growing between them or stepped back into safer territory. "James," she said softly, "what is happening here?" "I think you know." "Tell me anyway." He took a deep breath. "I am falling in love with you, Sarah Hartford, have been since the moment I saw you struggling with that firewood and trying to pretend you were not in pain. I know it is too soon. I know you are still mourning your husband. I know I have no right, but it is the truth, and I will not lie to you about it." Sarah felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I am falling in love with you too." and I feel so guilty about it. Thomas has only been gone 8 months. What kind of wife forgets her husband so quickly? You have not forgotten him. Love is not a finite resource, Sarah. Having loved him does not mean you cannot love someone else, and he would not want you to be alone and struggling. Would he? No. He would want me to be happy and safe. Then let yourself feel what you feel. We do not have to rush anything. We do not have to decide everything tonight, but we can be honest about what is happening. She wiped her eyes and looked at him. Really looked at him. At this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had not known she was praying. This kind, strong, gentle man who asked for nothing and gave everything. What do we do now? She asked. We keep going. I find work. I help you save this land. And we see where this takes us. People will talk. Let them. I might lose everything anyway. Not if I have anything to say about it. His confidence made her smile through her tears. You are very sure of yourself, James Dalton. Not myself, us. He reached out and took her hand again, and this time she did not pull away. I am sure of us. They sat like that for a long time, holding hands by the fire, not needing to say anything more. For the first time since Thomas died, Sarah felt something besides grief and fear. She felt hope. The next morning, James rode into town. Sarah gave him a list of supplies she needed if he could manage to bring them back. Small things that would make the winter more bearable. Coffee, flour, sugar, lamp oil. He promised to do his best and set out under a sky heavy with the promise of snow. Sarah spent the day doing laundry and mending, but her mind was elsewhere. She kept thinking about the night before, about James's declaration and her own. She had not expected to love again, had not thought herself capable of it so soon after losing Thomas. But what she felt for James was different from what she had felt for her husband. With Thomas, it had been a gradual growing together, a partnership built on mutual need and shared struggle. With James, it was like being struck by lightning. Sudden, intense, consuming. She was scrubbing a shirt against the washboard when she heard horses again. Her first thought was that James had returned early, but when she looked out, her blood ran cold. Vic Holloway was back, and this time, he had brought 5 men with him. Sarah dried her hands and stepped outside, fear making her hands shake. Holloway dismounted slowly, deliberately making a show of his power. Mrs. Hartford, we need to talk. I have nothing to say to you, Mr. Holloway. Please leave my property. Your property? He laughed, and his men joined in. For a few more months, maybe, then it becomes my property, unless you are ready to be reasonable. I told you before, this land is not for sale. Everything is for sale at the right price, but I'm starting to think you do not understand your situation. He took a step closer, and Sarah forced herself not to back away. You are a woman alone, trying to hold on to something you cannot keep. That is not admirable. That is stupidity. Get off my land. Or what? You will call that drifter boyfriend of yours? He is not here, Mrs. Hartford. And even if he was, he is just one man. Accidents happen to drifters all the time out here. The threat was clear, and Sarah felt panic rise in her throat. If you hurt him, I will go to the sheriff. Holloway laughed again. Blake? He is a practical man. He understands how things work. No. Mrs. Hartford, you have no friends in this. The sooner you accept that, the easier this will be. One of his men, a hard-faced individual with cold eyes, spoke up. Maybe she needs a more convincing demonstration, boss. Show her what happens to people who do not cooperate. Holloway nodded slowly. Maybe you're right, Clyde. Mrs. Hartford, I'm going to give you one more chance. Sell me this land for $500. That is more than fair given your situation. You can take the money, go to California or wherever, start fresh, refuse, and things get much harder for you, understand? Sarah lifted her chin, refusing to show her fear. I understand that you are a bully and a coward, And my answer is still no. Holloway's face darkened with anger. He gestured to his men. Burn the woodpile. No! Sarah lunged forward, but two of the men grabbed her arms, holding her back. She struggled, screaming, as the others took brands from their pockets and struck them alight. They tossed them onto the carefully stacked wood that James had spent days preparing. The dry bark and kindling caught quickly, flames leaping high into the cold air. Sarah watched in horror as a winter's worth of firewood went up in smoke. Tears streamed down her face, but whether from the smoke or grief or rage, she could not say. "Stop it! Please stop!" Holloway watched the fire with satisfaction. "This is what happens when you are stubborn, Mrs. Hartford. Next time it might be the barn. Or the cabin. Think about that." He mounted his horse. "You have 3 days to reconsider. After that, things get worse." They rode off, leaving her standing in front of the burning woodpile. Sarah sank to her knees in the dirt, watching months of work and her only chance at survival go up in flames. The heat was intense, pushing her back even as the cold November wind whipped around her. She felt hollowed out, defeated. She did not know how long she sat there before she heard hoofbeats again. Her head snapped up, fear spiking through her, but it was James riding hard into the yard. He took one look at the burning wood and her tear-stained face and was off his horse in an instant. "Sarah, what happened? Are you hurt?" She shook her head, unable to speak. He pulled her to her feet and into his arms, and she collapsed against his chest, sobbing. He held her tightly, one hand in her hair, murmuring soothing words she could not quite hear over her own crying. When she finally calmed enough to speak, she told him everything. His body went rigid with anger as she described Holloway's threats and the burning of the wood. "That bastard," he said quietly, and the fury in his voice made her look up. His eyes were hard as flint. "I should kill him." "No, that would only make things worse." "Worse? Sarah, he destroyed months of work. He threatened you. He will be back, and next time it will be the cabin or the barn or you." "I know." She pulled away from him, wrapping her arms around herself. "I know, James, but what can I do? He is rich and powerful. I am nothing." "You are not nothing." He took her face in his hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Do you hear me? You are not nothing, and I will not let him hurt you again." "How can you stop him? You are just one man." "Then we get help. We go to the territorial marshal. We make noise until someone listens." "That could take weeks, months, and in the meantime, he could burn me out or worse." James's jaw worked as he thought. The fire had burned down somewhat, though it still smoldered and popped. The loss of the wood was devastating, but Sarah knew James was right about the greater danger. Holloway had escalated. He would not stop now until he got what he wanted. "We could leave," James said finally. "Just pack up and go. Start over somewhere else." "And lose everything Thomas worked for? Give Holloway exactly what he wants?" "No." Sarah straightened her shoulders. "I will not run. This is my land, my home. I will not give it up without a fight. Then we fight, but we do it smart." He looked at the still burning wood, then at the cabin. "First things first. We need to make sure you can survive the winter. I will start cutting wood again tomorrow." "James, that will take weeks. And if Holloway finds out, he will just burn it again." "Not if I stack it inside the barn. It will be harder to get to, and we can watch it better." "There is not enough room in the barn for all that wood." "Then I will cut what fits, and hope it is enough. We will ration carefully." He pulled her close again. "We will figure this out, Sarah, together." She wanted to believe him, but looking at the smoldering remains of the woodpile, she felt her hope dying like the embers. Winter was coming, and she had no way to survive it now. Holloway had won. That night, they sat at her small table making plans. James insisted on sleeping inside the cabin from now on the floor near the door. It was not proper, but propriety seemed less important than safety. Sarah did not argue. The truth was she was terrified of being alone. Tell me about the debt, James said. Exactly how much? And to whom? She fetched the papers from the box where she kept important documents. Together they went through everything. The original loan Thomas had taken to buy equipment for his mining claim, the interest that had accumulated, the fees the bank had added. It came to $412 due by March 15th. That gives us 4 months, James said. We need to earn $100 a month. That is impossible. No, it is difficult. There is a difference. He studied the papers. What about your chickens? You could sell eggs in town. I get perhaps 24 eggs a week in winter. That would bring in maybe $1 or $2. Every little bit helps. What else? Can you sew? Do laundry? I can sew, yes, but who would hire me? The women in town barely acknowledge me. The men, then. Cowboys always need mending done. Shirts repaired, buttons replaced. I could spread the word when I'm in town. Sarah felt a tiny spark of hope. That might work. If I could earn $5 or $10 a week from sewing and eggs, that would help. And I will find work. Whatever I can get. Between us, we might just make it. They talked late into the night, planning and scheming. When Sarah finally retreated to her curtained alcove and James made his bed on the floor by the door, she felt more hopeful than she had in hours. It was a long shot, but it was a chance. She lay in her narrow bed listening to James's breathing on the other side of the curtain and felt a fierce protectiveness rise in her. This man had given her hope when she had none, had stood beside her when she had every reason to run. She would not let Holloway destroy him the way he was trying to destroy her. Somehow, they would survive this. They had to. The next week fell into a grueling routine. James rose before dawn to cut wood, stacking it inside the barn as he had promised. It was slow work, made slower by the fact that he also had to haul water, feed the animals, and handle the other daily tasks. Sarah spent her days cooking, cleaning, and trying to drum up sewing work. James had spread the word in town, and slowly, tentatively, a few cowboys brought her mending. The work paid poorly, a few pennies per shirt, but it was something. She also began making the trip into town twice a week to sell eggs. The store owner, Mr. Patterson, paid her fair prices and did not ask uncomfortable questions. Some of the women gave her cold looks, their eyes lingering on James when he accompanied her into town. She knew what they were thinking, knew the rumors that must be spreading. The widow Hartford and her cowboy lover living in sin out on the prairie. She tried not to care, but it stung. One morning in early December, Sarah woke to find the world transformed by snow. 6 inches had fallen during the night, with more still coming down. The temperature had plummeted, and frost covered the inside of the windows. She stoked the fire in the stove, grateful for the wood James had managed to cut and stack. It was not enough for the whole winter, but it would last a while if they were careful. James came in from feeding the animals, his face red with cold. It is coming down hard out there. We should stay inside today. Sarah poured him coffee, and they sat close to the stove, watching the snow through the window. The world outside was beautiful and terrifying. Beautiful because of the pristine white covering everything. Terrifying because each snowfall meant they were one day closer to the heart of winter, one day closer to running out of wood and food and time. I have been thinking, James said, about Holloway. What about him? He's going to come back probably soon, and when he does, we need to be ready. Ready how? I'm not sure yet, but we cannot just sit here waiting to be victims. He set down his cup and looked at her seriously. Sarah, what do you know about him, his business, his operation, his vulnerabilities? Not much. He owns the Triple H, runs cattle and horses. He is rich, or at least appears to be. Appears to be. That is interesting. James leaned back, thinking. Rich men do not usually bother with small properties like this unless they need them for some specific reason. What could he want with your 40 acres? Sarah had wondered the same thing. There's nothing special about it. Decent grazing, a good water source, but nothing that would make it particularly valuable. Water, James said suddenly. Tell me about your water source. We have a well, and there's a creek that runs through the north part of the property. It comes down from the mountains, runs year-round. And does this creek flow onto Holloway's property? Sarah tried to picture the lay of the land. Yes, I think so. It crosses through my land and then continues south onto his range. That is it then. James stood excited now. He needs your water. If he controls this property, he controls the source of that creek. He could divert it, dam it, do whatever he wants. Without it, his southern pastures would be useless in summer. But there are other creeks, other water sources. Maybe not enough. Or maybe not in the right places. James began pacing. This gives us leverage. If we can make him understand that we know why he wants the land, we might be able to negotiate from a position of strength. Or he might just kill us and take it anyway. That is a risk, James admitted, but men like Holloway prefer to appear legitimate. Outright murder draws attention. No, he will keep trying to force you out legally or make it look like an accident. That is not comforting. I know, but it means we have time. Time to gather evidence, to make allies, to build a case. Sarah wanted to believe him, but doubt gnawed at her. They were two people with almost no resources going up against a powerful rancher with money and influence. The odds were not in their favor. As if reading her thoughts, James knelt beside her chair and took her hands. I know you are scared. I am scared too. But we are not going to roll over and let him win. We are going to fight and we are going to survive. And when this is all over, you are going to keep this land. I promise you that. She looked into his eyes and saw absolute conviction there. She wanted to tell him not to make promises he could not keep. But she also needed to believe, needed to hold on to hope, because without it, she would shatter. Okay, she whispered, we fight. He smiled and kissed her forehead gently. It was the first time he had kissed her, even in such a chaste way, and the touch of his lips sent warmth spreading through her. When he pulled back, she saw the tenderness in his eyes and felt her heart constrict. I love you, Sarah Hartford, and I'm going to take care of you. That is a promise I can keep. I love you too, James Dalton. They sat together by the stove as the snow fell outside, holding each other, taking comfort in their shared warmth. For just that moment, the world outside with all its threats and worries faded away. There was only the two of them, and that was enough. The snow continued for 3 days, accumulating to nearly 2 feet. James spent the time doing indoor repairs and maintenance while Sarah sewed and cooked. They talked for hours, learning more about each other, sharing stories and dreams. In the evenings, James would read aloud from Sarah's small collection of books. She loved listening to his voice, the way he brought the words to life. On the 4th day, the sun broke through and the temperature rose slightly. James announced he needed to go into town for supplies and to look for work. Sarah wanted to argue, wanted to keep him close where she knew he was safe, but she knew they needed money desperately. She bundled up and went with him. The ride into town was beautiful. The world transformed by snow into something clean and new. But the beauty could not hide the cold, and by the time they reached town, Sarah's feet were numb in her boots despite the wool socks. They went first to Patterson's store, where Sarah sold her eggs and purchased a few supplies with the money. While she shopped, James asked around about work. He came back looking frustrated. Nothing, he said. Everyone has already laid off for winter. The best I could get was a promise of some work hauling ice when the river freezes solid. When will that be? January, maybe February. Too late. They needed money now. Sarah felt despair settling over her like the snow. They left the store and were walking toward where they had tied the horse when a voice called out, Mrs. Hartford, Mr. Dalton, wait a moment. They turned to see Reverend Collins hurrying toward them, his black coat flapping. He was a kindly man in his 50s who had presided over Thomas's funeral. Reverend, Sarah said, good morning. Good morning to you both. I am glad I caught you. I heard about your troubles with Mr. Holloway. Sarah's cheeks burned. It is nothing, Reverend. A simple business disagreement. That is not what I heard. I heard he burned your woodpile. That sounds like more than a disagreement to me. The Reverend's face was serious. "Mrs. Hartford, I want you to know that the church is here to help. We have a discretionary fund for emergencies. It is not much, but it could help you through the winter." Tears sprang to Sarah's eyes. "Reverend, I could not possibly—" "You can and you will. Pride is all well and good, but it does not keep you warm in January." He pressed a small cloth bag into her hands. "There is $50 there. Use it for wood, food, whatever you need. Pay it back if you can, but do not worry if you cannot. That is what the fund is for." Sarah clutched the bag, overwhelmed. "Thank you. Thank you so much." "Thank the congregation. They are good people, despite what you might think. Many of them have wanted to help but did not know how." He glanced at James, then back to Sarah. "I am not here to judge how you choose to live your life, Mrs. Hartford, but I will say this. People are talking, and talk can be damaging. If you need the church's support in the future, you might consider how things appear." He said it gently, but the message was clear. Sarah and James living together unmarried was creating scandal. Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. After the Reverend left, James said quietly, "He is right, you know, about appearances." "I know. There is a simple solution." She looked at him. "James, marry me, Sarah." Her heart stopped. "What?" "Marry me. I love you. You love me." "We are already living as if we are married. Why not make it official?" "Because it is too fast. Because I am still mourning Thomas. Because you deserve better than a woman with nothing to her name and a mountain of debt." "I do not want better. I want you." He took both her hands in his. "Sarah, I know this is fast. I know it is not conventional, but nothing about our situation is conventional. I want to protect you, to help you, to build a life with you. Let me do that properly, as your husband." She searched his face, looking for any sign of doubt or obligation, but all she saw was love and determination and hope. He meant it. He truly wanted to marry her. "Yes," she said, the word coming out in a rush. "Yes, I will marry you." James let out a whoop of joy that startled several passers-by and pulled her into his arms, spinning her around in the snowy street. When he set her down, he kissed her properly for the first time, his lips warm against hers despite the cold. Sarah felt the world tilt and steady itself on a new axis. This was right. This was what she was meant to do. They went directly to the church and found Reverend Collins in his small office behind the sanctuary. When they told him they wished to marry, he smiled broadly. "I was hoping you would come to this decision. When?" "As soon as possible," James said. "Today, if we can." "Today? That is quite sudden." "We see no reason to wait," Sarah said. "We are both of age, both free to marry. Please, Reverend, we need this." The Reverend studied them both, then nodded. "All right, let me get my wife to act as a witness, and we will take care of this now." An hour later, Sarah Hartford became Sarah Dalton. The ceremony was simple, just the four of them in the cold church, but to Sarah it felt more real and binding than any elaborate wedding could have been. When James kissed her as his wife, she felt something settle into place inside her, a rightness she had not expected. They rode back to the cabin as husband and wife, the $50 from the church and their new status giving them reason to hope. That night, Sarah moved her few belongings from the alcove to share the space with James properly. It was strange and wonderful and terrifying all at once. When he held her and made love to her gently, reverently, she felt tears slide down her cheeks. "What is wrong?" he murmured, concerned. "Nothing. Everything is right. I just never thought I would feel this way again. Happy, hopeful, loved." "You are loved, so very loved." He kissed her tears away. "We are going to be all right, Sarah. I promise you." She believed him. In that moment, held safe in his arms, she truly believed. The $50 from the church was a lifeline. They used part of it to buy additional supplies and put the rest aside for the land payment. James continued cutting wood whenever weather permitted, and Sarah took in every bit of sewing work she could find. Word had gotten around that she was fast and skilled, and more cowboys began bringing her their mending. December turned to January. The cold deepened, and several times they faced blizzards that kept them inside for days. During those times, huddled together by the stove, Sarah felt grateful for James's presence. She could not imagine facing this winter alone anymore. Holloway stayed away, which made them both nervous. James was convinced the man was planning something, but without knowing what, they could only wait and prepare as best they could. In mid-January, James was finally able to take work cutting ice from the frozen river. The pay was decent, $3 a day, but the work was brutal. He would leave before dawn and return after dark, soaked and frozen, barely able to move. Sarah would have hot water ready to warm him, hot food to fill him, and a warm bed to hold him through the night. She hated seeing him suffer, but they needed the money desperately. After 2 weeks of ice cutting, James brought home $42. Combined with what Sarah had earned from sewing and eggs and the remainder of the church money, they had nearly $120 saved. It was not enough, but it was progress. In early February, disaster struck. Sarah woke in the night to the sound of crackling and the smell of smoke. She shook James awake. Fire! They tumbled out of bed and found smoke seeping under the door. James threw it open, and they saw flames engulfing the barn. The horses were screaming. "Get water!" James shouted and ran toward the barn. Sarah grabbed buckets and began pumping water from the well, her hands numb with cold and terror. James emerged from the barn leading his horse and the mule, their eyes rolling with fear. He tied them to the fence and ran back inside. "James, no!" Sarah screamed, but he was already gone. She ran toward the barn with a bucket of water, but the heat drove her back. The entire structure was fully engulfed now, flames reaching into the night sky. James emerged carrying a burning beam away from the door, his shirt smoking. Sarah threw the water over him, then grabbed his arm. "You cannot go back in. It is too dangerous. The tools, the remaining wood. It is not worth your life." He looked at the barn, frustration and rage on his face. There was nothing they could do now but watch it burn. They stood together in the snow, arms around each other, as months of work and their only shelter for the animals went up in flames. When dawn broke, the barn was a smoking ruin. Investigating the wreckage, James found evidence of kerosene. "This was set deliberately," he said, his voice hard. "Holloway. We cannot prove it. I know. But we both know it was him." The loss of the barn was devastating. Not only had they lost the structure and everything in it, but now the animals had no shelter. James spent the next week constructing a rough lean-to that would provide some protection, but it was nothing compared to what they had lost. Sarah felt her hope crumbling. Every time they made progress, Holloway struck back. It was like trying to climb a mountain made of sand. For every step forward, they slid 2 steps back. She was sitting at the table one evening adding up their savings when she started to cry. They had $108. They needed $412. Even if they earned money every single day from now until March, which was impossible, they would fall short. They were going to lose everything. James pulled her into his arms and let her cry. When she finally quieted, he said, "I have an idea, but you are not going to like it." "What?" "What if we went to Holloway, offered him a deal? He gives us the money to pay off the bank, and in exchange we give him water rights to the creek, legal access in writing. That way he gets what he really wants and we keep the land." Sarah pulled back to look at him. "You want to negotiate with the man who has been trying to destroy us? I want to find a solution that lets us survive. This could work, Sarah. He gets guaranteed water access. We keep our home. Everyone wins. Except we would be trusting a man who has burned our wood and our barn. What is to stop him from taking the water rights and then foreclosing on us anyway? We get it in writing, a legal contract. He provides the money to satisfy the debt, and in exchange, we grant him permanent water rights. It could work." Sarah wanted to refuse, wanted to tell him they would find another way, but there was no other way. They both knew it. "All right," she said tiredly. "We try it your way." 2 days later, they rode to the Triple H Ranch. It was an impressive operation with a large main house, multiple barns, and extensive corrals. Cowboys moved about their business, giving Sarah and James curious looks as they dismounted. A man came out onto the porch of the main house, not Holloway, but someone who looked like he might be a foreman or manager. "Help you folks?" "We are here to see Mr. Holloway," James said. "We have a business proposition for him." The man disappeared inside and returned a minute later. "He will see you. Come in." They were led into a lavish sitting room that spoke of money and taste. Sarah felt acutely aware of her threadbare dress and worn boots. After a few minutes, Vic Holloway entered, looking pleased and surprised to see them. Well, Mrs. Hartford, or should I say Mrs. Dalton, I heard about your hasty wedding." His tone made it clear what he thought of that. "To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" James spoke before Sarah could. "We have a proposition for you, Mr. Holloway. We know you want access to the creek that runs through Sarah's property. We are willing to grant you legal water rights in exchange for $412. Holloway's eyes narrowed. "Are you now? And why would I pay for something I can get for free when the bank forecloses? Because this way you get it now. Legally, with no questions or complications. You get guaranteed access in writing, and we get to keep our home. Everyone benefits. Except I would be helping you when I could simply wait and take what I want." "You could try," James said. "But there are territorial laws about water rights. We could tie you up in court for years. Make sure you never get clear title to that water. Is that worth saving a few $100s?" Holloway studied them both, clearly calculating. Sarah held her breath. This had to work. They had no other options. $500, Holloway said finally. "I pay off your debt and give you an additional $88. In exchange, I get unrestricted water rights to the creek, in perpetuity. And you agree never to dam, divert, or otherwise interfere with the natural flow of water onto my property." James looked at Sarah. It was more than they had hoped for. The extra money would let them buy materials to rebuild the barn, see them through the rest of winter with some breathing room. "We want it in writing," Sarah said. "A legal contract signed and witnessed." "Of course. I will have my lawyer draw up the papers. You can sign them when you come to collect the money." Holloway stood, signaling the meeting was over. "I am glad you finally saw reason, Mrs. Dalton. It would have been a shame to see you freeze to death out there." The casual cruelty of his words made Sarah's stomach turn, but she forced herself to remain calm. They had gotten what they came for. That was all that mattered. 3 days later, they returned to sign the contract. Holloway's lawyer, a thin man with suspicious eyes, went over every word with them. The terms were clear. Holloway would pay the bank directly, satisfying Sarah's debt. He would give them an additional $88 in cash. In exchange, he received permanent water rights to the creek, with strict stipulations that Sarah and James could not interfere with its flow. "This is binding," the lawyer said. "If you violate the terms, Mr. Holloway can take you to court and potentially seize the entire property." "We understand," James said. He looked at Sarah. "Are you sure about this?" She thought about Thomas, about all his dreams for this land. Thought about the last 8 months of struggle and fear. Thought about the future she and James could build here if they could just get past this hurdle. "I am sure," she said. She picked up the pen and signed her name. James signed beside her. Holloway counted out $500 in cash, grinning like a wolf. "Pleasure doing business with you folks. I will have this delivered to the bank today. You should receive confirmation within the week." They took the money and left. Sarah felt strange, like she had just sold a piece of her soul, but when they stopped at the bank on their way out of town and the clerk confirmed that the debt would be satisfied, she felt something release in her chest. They had done it. Against all odds, they had saved the land. That night, lying in James's arms, Sarah said, "I cannot believe it is over. We are actually going to make it." "We are," he agreed. And now we can start thinking about the future instead of just surviving the present. What kind of future do you want, James? He was quiet for a moment, his hand stroking her hair. I want to build a real life here with you. Fix up the cabin, rebuild the barn, maybe get some cattle or horses. I want to make this land thrive. And I want children if you do. I want a family. Sarah felt tears well up. I want all of that too. I thought I would never have any of it. And then you came chopping firewood and everything changed. Best day's work I ever did, he said, and she could hear the smile in his voice. The rest of winter passed more peacefully. With the debt satisfied and money in reserve, they could breathe easier. James rebuilt the barn, making it stronger than before. They purchased 2 young cows and a good bull, the start of a herd. Sarah continued taking in sewing, not because they desperately needed the money now, but because she enjoyed the work and the connection to the community. In March, the first signs of spring appeared. The snow began to melt, revealing the brown grass beneath. The creek swelled with runoff, and Sarah saw why Holloway had wanted those water rights. The flow was substantial, enough to irrigate significant acreage. She felt a twinge of regret at giving away that resource, but pushed it aside. They had their land. That was what mattered. One evening in early April, Sarah realized her monthly courses were late. She waited another week before saying anything to James, afraid to hope. But when 2 weeks passed and still nothing came, she could no longer deny what her body was telling her. James, she said over supper one night, I think I might be pregnant. He froze, his fork halfway to his mouth. Pregnant? Are you sure? Not completely, but all the signs are there. I think I'm about 6 or 7 weeks along. A slow smile spread across his face, and then he was around the table, pulling her into his arms. Sarah, that is wonderful. We are going to have a baby. She laughed and cried at the same time, overwhelmed by joy and terror. A baby. She was going to have James's baby. After years of wanting children with Thomas and never conceiving, she had begun to think it might not be possible. But now, with James, new life was growing inside her. Over the next weeks, as spring bloomed across Montana territory, Sarah's pregnancy became undeniable. She felt tired and sick in the mornings, but also more alive than she had in years. James was attentive and protective, refusing to let her do any heavy work. He brought her wildflowers from the meadow and talked to her belly in the evenings, telling their unborn child about the world they would build together. In May, Reverend Collins came out to the cabin to check on them. When he learned about the baby, he was delighted. This is wonderful news. The congregation will be so happy for you both. Will they? Sarah asked quietly. Or will they count on their fingers and realize I conceived before we were married? The Reverend looked at her kindly. Sarah, you married in December. This baby will be born in, November? That is 11 months. Close enough to be respectable, and anyone who wants to make an issue of it is not worth your concern. You have been through enough. Enjoy this blessing. His words lifted a weight from Sarah's shoulders. She had been worried about gossip, about judgment. But the Reverend was right. They had done nothing wrong, and their child was a blessing, not a scandal. Summer came, and with it, hard work and long days. James proved to be a natural rancher, managing their small herd with skill and patience. They planted a large garden, and Sarah spent hours tending it as her belly grew. Neighbors who had been cold to her before began stopping by, bringing gifts for the baby and offering advice. Slowly, Sarah began to feel part of a community again. In September, as the days grew shorter and the nights cooler, Sarah began preparing for the baby's arrival. They set up a small cradle in the cabin that James had made from pine. Sarah sewed tiny clothes and blankets, her hands moving automatically while her mind wandered to the future. What would their child be like? Would it have James's blue eyes or her brown ones? His dark hair or her lighter brown? Would it be healthy and strong? Worry gnawed at her sometimes late at night. She was 23 now, hardly ancient, but she had heard the stories about childbirth, about the things that could go wrong. James would hold her when she voiced these fears, reminding her that women had been having babies since the beginning of time, that she was strong, that everything would be all right. In mid-November, exactly 1 year after James had first appeared in her yard with his axe and quiet determination, Sarah's labor began. They had arranged for the midwife from town, Mrs. Chen, to come when the time came. James rode hard through a light snow to fetch her, and she arrived within a few hours, calm and capable. The labor was long and difficult. Sarah had not truly understood what pain was until that day, but through it all, James stayed by her side, holding her hand, wiping her face, telling her she was strong, she was brave, she could do this. And finally, as the sun set on that November day, their son came into the world, red and squalling and perfect. A boy, Mrs. Chen said, laying the baby on Sarah's chest. A big, healthy boy. Sarah looked down at her son through tears of exhaustion and joy. He had dark hair like James and a strong cry that filled the cabin. When James bent to look at them both, his face was wet with tears. "He is perfect," James whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for him." They named him Thomas James Dalton, honoring both the past and the future. Young Tommy, as they called him, was a good baby, healthy and strong. He nursed well and slept in reasonable stretches, giving Sarah time to recover from the birth. In the weeks after Tommy's arrival, Sarah felt herself settling into motherhood with surprising ease. She had worried she would not know what to do, but instinct guided her. James was a devoted father, taking Tommy whenever Sarah needed rest, talking to him constantly, showing him the world outside their window. Winter came again, but this time Sarah faced it without fear. They had plenty of wood, thanks to James's tireless work the previous year. They had food in the larder, money in reserve, and a healthy son. The cabin was warm and full of love. On Christmas Eve, they bundled Tommy up and took him to the church service in town. People crowded around to see the baby, cooing and congratulating them. Sarah saw approval in faces that had once been cold. She and James had proven themselves. They had survived the worst and built something good. That night, sitting by the fire with Tommy sleeping in his cradle and James beside her, Sarah thought about the previous year, about the day she had been carrying firewood until her back nearly broke, about the cowboy who had chopped a winter's worth for her and stayed to chop so much more, about how love had come to her when she least expected it, in the form of a quiet man with steady hands and a kind heart. "What are you thinking about?" James asked, noticing her faraway expression. "About how much can change in a year, how different my life is now than it was then. Better or worse?" She smiled at him. "So much better. I was just surviving before. Now I am living." "We are living," he corrected. Together." "Together," she agreed. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire, listening to their son's soft breathing. Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside they were warm and safe and loved. Years passed, and the Dalton family grew and prospered. They added more cattle to their herd, expanded their garden, made improvements to the cabin. When Tommy was 3, Sarah gave birth to twin girls, Anna and Elizabeth, who filled the house with laughter and chaos. 2 years after that came another son, David. James proved himself an excellent father, patient and kind, teaching his children about the land and animals, about hard work and integrity. Sarah ran the household and continued taking in sewing, more because she enjoyed it than because they needed the money. The Dalton Ranch, modest though it was, became known as a place of hospitality and fairness. Vic Holloway died in 1891, thrown from a horse during a drunken ride. His ranch was sold to pay his debts, broken up and divided among several buyers. The water rights he had purchased from the Daltons proved to be the most valuable asset, eventually being bought by a consortium of ranchers who used the creek to irrigate their combined properties. Sarah and James received offers over the years to sell their land, but always refused. This was their home, bought with struggle and sacrifice, and they would never give it up. The children grew. Tommy became a quiet, thoughtful boy who loved books and learning. The twins were wild and fearless, always getting into mischief. David was gentle and artistic, spending hours drawing the animals and landscapes around him. Sarah and James watched them grow with pride and wonder, grateful for the family they had built. In 1895, Montana became a state, and the Daltons celebrated with the rest of the territory. The Wild West of Sarah's youth was slowly fading, replaced by something more settled and civilized. Roads improved, towns grew, technology advanced. But on their ranch, life maintained a comfortable rhythm tied to the seasons and the land. As the years went by, Sarah sometimes thought about Thomas Hartford, her first husband. She had loved him, and his death had devastated her. But she had come to understand that we can love more than once in a lifetime, and that new love does not diminish the old. Thomas had given her 3 years and the land. James had given her a lifetime and a family. Both had been gifts, and she was grateful for both. On their 15th wedding anniversary in December 1898, James gave Sarah a beautiful wooden box he had made himself. Inside were 5 envelopes, each containing a letter. "One for each of our children," he explained, "to be given to them when they are grown. Letters telling them how we met, how we built this life, how much they are loved." Sarah read through the letters with tears streaming down her face. James had written about that first day, about seeing her struggling with the firewood and knowing somehow that his life was about to change. He wrote about falling in love with her courage and determination. He wrote about their struggles and triumphs, about the night each child was born, about his hopes for their futures. "These are beautiful," she said when she finished. "The children will treasure them." I wanted them to know the truth of how we began, that sometimes love comes when you least expect it, that helping someone in need can change your whole life. That family is not always what you are born into, but sometimes what you build. Sarah added her own letters to the box, sharing her memories and feelings from those early days. The box was stored away carefully, to be opened when the time was right. The children did grow eventually. Tommy went to university in Missoula, studying to be a teacher. The twins married local boys and settled nearby, starting their own families. David moved to San Francisco to pursue art, though he came home every summer without fail. Sarah and James became grandparents, then great-grandparents, watching their family tree spread and flourish. In the spring of 1920, James took ill. He was 63, still strong and active, but a cough that started in March grew worse through April. The doctor diagnosed pneumonia and did what he could, but antibiotics were still years away. Sarah sat by his bedside day and night, holding his hand, talking to him about their life together. "No regrets," James said one evening, his voice weak but certain. "Not a single one." "Not even stopping to help a stubborn woman with firewood?" Sarah asked, forcing a smile through her tears. "Especially not that." He squeezed her hand. "That was the best decision I ever made. You gave me a life, Sarah, a real life, family, love, purpose, everything that matters." "You gave me the same. You saved me, James. In every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," he corrected gently. He died 3 days later, peaceful in his sleep with Sarah holding his hand. She was devastated by the loss, but also grateful for the 37 years they had shared. Not many people get that kind of love, that depth of partnership. She had been blessed twice in her life with good men, and while she mourned James terribly, she did not regret a single day they had spent together. Sarah lived another 15 years, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. She remained on the ranch until the end, refusing all suggestions that she move to town or live with one of the children. This was her home, bought with struggle and tears and love. She would not leave it while she still drew breath. On a November morning in 1935, 74-year-old Sarah Dalton passed away peacefully in her sleep. She was buried beside James on a hill overlooking the creek that had once caused so much trouble and that now watered flourishing pastures. Their children gathered for the funeral, along with grandchildren, great-grandchildren, neighbors, and friends. The Dalton family had become a fixture in the community, respected and loved. At the gathering after the funeral, Tommy opened the wooden box his father had made so many years ago. He read aloud the letters James and Sarah had written, telling the story of how they met, how they fell in love, how they built a life from nothing but determination and care for each other. There was not a dry eye in the room when he finished. The story of the widow who had been carrying firewood until her back nearly broke, and the cowboy who had chopped a winter's worth for her became family legend passed down through generations. It was a story about kindness and courage, about love finding you when you need it most, about two people building something beautiful from the wreckage of loss. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through the years. The creek still flowed, the land still produced, and the cabin where it all began was carefully preserved, a monument to where the Dalton family story started. And on cold November days, when the wind came down from the mountains and the wood smoke rose into the clear air, people said you could almost hear the sound of an axe splitting wood, steady and sure, promising warmth and safety and love.